Hello, Mike. And thank you. And thank you too for joining us for another episode of Broken Bread, where we're studying, if you recall, a study based on the book, The Better Covenant. And today we come to study number 8, which is part of a mini study within a study. And we're looking at the departure from Egypt. And this is study 8, Departure, the Passover. So, welcome. It's good to have you with us. And thank you for your notes of encouragement that you send in from time to time. We do appreciate being part of this Bible study group together. Okay, as usual, we start off with context, trying to put this in its context because that makes so much of a difference as to what we're actually trying to understand in these things. So let me remind you of the road map. This, you recall, is a study that we did earlier. This is the promise. These verses from Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 to 8, are really vital verses, and they set the context for the whole of the book of Exodus and Leviticus, for that matter, and a little bit of Numbers, and even Deuteronomy. These few verses. Wherefore say to the children of Israel, I am Jehovah, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. It's that little paragraph or that little phrase, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. And if you remember, we said that you can actually look at these promises. It goes on into verse 7, of course, to say, and I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God, and you shall know that I am Jehovah, your God, who brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And then verse 8, and I will bring you into the land which I swear to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a heritage. I am Jehovah. And we've said that you can actually look at this promise, this word, this commission that was given to Moses, and look at it really in three different settings. First of all, the first verse, verse 6, the scene is Egypt. The setting for the next verse, verse 7, is actually Sinai. And the setting, of course, for verse 8 is Canaan, the land. So let's just remind ourselves. These are the promises that God gave and which would find their fulfillment while they were still in the land of Egypt. I will bring you out, says God, from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage. And I will redeem you. This is where we come to at this particular study. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm. That means God showing his power, stripping back his arms, rolling up his sleeves to show his determination to set this people free and make them his own, and with great judgments. And then, of course, the next verse would take us on to Sinai. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be to you a God. And then the third of these scenes, and I will bring you in unto the land, and more to say about that subsequently. I will bring you out, I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. The three phases of God's purpose for the people of Israel. First, to bring them out, then to bring them to himself, then to take them into the land of his choosing for them. And when we talked about the plagues or the judgments, we made reference to this. I will go through the land of Egypt. This is Exodus chapter 12 and verse 12. I will go through the land of Egypt in that night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am Jehovah. This introduces another theme, doesn't it? Not only would God bring his judgment against the leaders and the people of Egypt, but against all the gods of Egypt, the powers, invisible powers for the most part, behind the power of the pharaohs. And then we have those 10 great plagues, turning water to blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, pestilence, boils, thunderstorm of hail and fire, locusts, darkness for 3 days, and then finally the death of the firstborn. But in between plague number 9, darkness for 3 days, and death of the firstborn, we need to insert this particular study. This has to do with the institution of the Passover. And we're going to have a look at the instruction for this Passover in order to see parallels between this event, in which the mediator of the Old Covenant, Moses, went through certain actions, and we're going to have a look at the way in which we find a parallel with those incidents with Jesus in the upper room. Let's have a look at this. We'll break it up bit by bit. These are the ingredients, if you like, of the institution or the sacrifice of the Passover. A new start. This is Exodus 12, verses 1 and 2. And Jehovah spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be to you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. That tells us that what God was about to do here was make a new start. And it's only God who can make new starts. Human beings can't really make new starts. They can modify what they're doing. They can make their New Year's resolutions and all the rest of it. But because there's no way of detaching themselves from the past and from its memories and from its failures and its wounds, you never really do make a new start. But God can make a new start because he can bring the past to an absolute end. And that's what he's going to do. And for the people of Israel, God marked it by saying he was going to change the calendar. This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. This is like having a brand new diary and turning to the first page and it's blank. There's nothing on it at all. God's going to start all over again and do something remarkable with this people. And there's a verse in Hebrews chapter 11, you remember that chapter that speaks about the heroes of faith. And I'm reading here from Weymouth's paraphrase because of a particular word he uses. He's referring to Moses, and he makes this statement in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 28. He says, Through faith he, as Moses, instituted the Passover and the sprinkling with blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch the Israelites. Moses made or did the Passover. In nearly all the other versions I could find, it actually says he kept the Passover. But that isn't the best word to translate what's being said here, because, of course, you can't keep something until you've got it. Is that logical? Well, Moses had nothing to start with. Moses instituted the Passover. He brought it into existence by faith. It wasn't something he borrowed from somewhere else. It wasn't something he'd seen in that sense. This is Moses working by faith and bringing into being something called the Passover. through faith, Moses instituted. It's the Greek word to make, or to manufacture something, or just to do something. He instituted the Passover, the sprinkling with blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch their families. So Moses did or made the Passover, and in strict accuracy, at this time he wasn't keeping the Passover, he instituted it. The first Passover took place in Egypt. Thereafter, all subsequent Passovers look back to this one. We'd find that if we dig deeper, and if you're following the notes that you can find on BibleBase.com, you'll see we can dig down at this particular point. By faith, looking forward to a deliverance that had not yet taken place. It's interesting, that word to make something, to institute it. It's used again in Matthew chapter 26 and verse 18, where Jesus gives instructions to his disciples, and he says, "And he said, Go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher," that's Jesus himself, of course, says, "My time is at hand, and I will keep." That's not the word keep in the sense of guarding or remembering. That's this same word that's used in Hebrews. You might say, "I will institute the Passover at your house. I will make the Passover." I find it very interesting that you've got this verb used for these two, because Moses instituted a special commemorative feast called the Passover, and Jesus was about to bring into being a special celebratory feast that in many ways mirrored the old Passover. In fact, it's my conviction that in the upper room we witness two Passovers. We witness the last Passover of the Old Covenant and the first Passover of the New Covenant. Common to both Passovers, of course, is the lamb. These are the instructions that God gave to Moses and he to the people. This is God speaking, "Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th month of this year they shall take to them every man a lamb according to their father's house, a lamb for a household." If you read in detail in Exodus, you'll find in this one it could actually be a lamb or a kid, that's to say, a goat. But they're to take this lamb and they keep it up in a sort of a quarantine for several days to be sure that this lamb is without blemish, that it's not sickening for anything, that it has nothing wrong with it. This lamb has to be perfect. One of the instructions given later on in the Bible for the sacrifice is that to be accepted, it has to be perfect. So now we've got a perfect lamb here, and I'll be surprised if your mind doesn't immediately connect with the one that John the Baptist identified as the perfect lamb. This is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. And it begins with a sacrifice. There is a sense, of course, in which all feasts begin with the sacrifice. Exodus chapter 12, verse 6, "And you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at even." This is an interesting way of expressing it, because obviously there were thousands of lambs that were going to be slaughtered, sacrificed at this particular point in time. But the Bible has a unique way of making it sound as though it's just one lamb. "And you shall keep it." This is the Passover lamb. "You shall keep it until the 14th day of the month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it at evening." There is only one lamb that can take away the sins of the world. Only one lamb that can be the sacrifice necessary to effect redemption. Later on in Exodus chapter 12 and verse 27, It says, and you shall say, it is the sacrifice of Jehovah's Passover. I like the way it expresses that. I suppose in each house it took place, they would say, well, this is Reuben's Passover, and this is this Passover, and this is this person's Passover. But in the imagery behind it and the truth behind it, this is the sacrifice of Jehovah's Passover. Do you remember the story of Abraham? When Isaac, his son, said to him, well, we've got the wood and we've got the fire, but where's the lamb? And Abraham said, my son, God himself shall provide the lamb. Here it is, the sacrifice of Jehovah's Passover, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses, and the people bowed their head and worshipped. So you've got the lamb, and it must forfeit its life in order for this redemption to be effected. And as the blood is slain, if you read between the lines, you'll discover that the blood of the lamb was actually caught in a bowl. And then it says this is the blood applied. That's sacrifice is redemption accomplished. Now we come on to redemption applied. Here's the blood applied. Exodus 12 and verse 7. And they shall take of the blood and put it on the two side posts and on the lintel upon the houses wherein they shall eat it. That's Exodus 12 and verse 7. This is from the next few verses. It is Jehovah's Passover. For I will go through the land of Egypt in that night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt, here it is, I will execute judgments. I am Jehovah. Exodus chapter 12 and verse 13. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and there shall be no plague upon you to destroy you, when I smite the land of Egypt. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial. Now let me say another obvious thing, that you can't have a memorial of something until the event has taken place. You can't remember something that hasn't happened. At least not usually you can't. But here, this was a day that was going to be a memorial. We'll say a little bit more about that in a moment or two. But let's have a look at this blood applied. They were to take the blood that had been caught in the basin, and then using hyssop, which is a kind of a shrub of sorts, a little shrub, and they would use that almost as a paintbrush. And they would smear the blood on the lintels, that's the two side posts, and on the lintels, upon the houses wherein they shall eat it. Now, this is a key thing here, that they themselves did not have the blood applied to them. The blood was applied to the doorposts, where they were inside eating the sacrifice of Jehovah's Passover. It is Jehovah's Passover, Exodus 12 and verse 11. For I will go through the land of Egypt in that night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgment. I am Jehovah. So this was judgment. It was judgment coming in a particular way that God had ordained, that the eldest son in every family, whether that family was Hebrew, Egyptian, of the cattle, of the flocks, whatever it was, every eldest firstborn son died. This was the judgment coming. The soul that sins, it shall die. That's a statement of God. And if the soul does not die, then a substitute must die. In this case, the firstborn sons would die. And this would be a memorial. The blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are, and when I see the blood. You will remember, or if you think about it, you'll remember, I'm sure, that the people inside couldn't see the blood. They were inside, eating the lamb. And of course, the people who were inside didn't have the blood splashed upon them. This verse, Exodus chapter 12 and verse 13, says, when I see the blood, I will pass over you. There's a habit developed at certain times, and occasionally it still kind of breaks the surface, of people who cover things with the blood. They cover their journey with the blood in prayer. They cover their planned events with the blood. They cover their families with the blood. And I'm sure that God knows exactly what they mean. And I know exactly what they mean. And I'm not critical of the people who do this. But the blood is for God. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. And the blood was not given as a protection against Satan. It was given as a protection against the executing angel who was sent by Jehovah. But when God sees the blood, he knows that the people inside that house have obeyed this institution of the Passover, and they are inside enjoying the lamb. Isn't this an amazing scene if you think about it? Don't just think about it, listen to it in your imagination. And listen to the cries from every household in Egypt as the eldest son was found dead. And then take a look at these little hovels, no doubt, in which the people of the Hebrews were living, eating their lamb in a particular way, which we shall come to in a moment. All future Passovers would be a memorial looking back to this one. Do you remember when Jesus instituted his Passover in the upper room? He said, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I wonder which Passover he was referring to. Was he referring to the last Passover of the Old Covenant? Or was he referring to the first Passover of the New Covenant? I know this, the Bible says, with desire I have desired. That is that strong word that's translated lust in Galatians. With lust I have lusted, with great, strong, passionate desire. I have looked forward to this day, says Jesus. This day that marks the beginning of the redemptive event. And for that little company too. This Passover would be looking forwards to events that were yet to take place. This Passover is the new covenant in my blood. This Passover, this first breaking of bread, was looking forward to a coming event. Calvary had not taken place except in the eternal heart of God. But now it would take place, and here Jesus looks forward to it. He looks forward to the redemption. He looks forward to the deliverance, just in the way that the people of Egypt looked forward to their deliverance. This day shall be to you a memorial. All future Passovers would be a memorial looking back to this first Passover. And then there is that Passover meal. Exodus chapter 12 and verse 8 says, and they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire and unleavened bread and with bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Here they are sitting down, no flesh except the lamb on the table. This is almost a reenactment of the first Passover. In fact, some of the words that Jesus uses are taken almost like quotations from here. Here's the one I referred to. When the hour had come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. This is Luke chapter 22. Then he said to them, with fervent desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say to you, I will no longer eat of it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. We know that Jesus, as a boy, for the first 12 years of his life, every year, it tells us in Luke's Gospel, that they went up to Jerusalem for the Passover. So this isn't the first Passover he's had, but it would be the last of the Old Covenant Passovers. He would not eat of this or drink of that cup of fellowship until it was fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Now, what mindset did the people of Israel have to have? This is Exodus chapter 12 and verse 11. And thus shall ye eat it, with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is Jehovah's Passover. This is highly symbolic, of course. They were to eat it with their loins girded. You know how if you wear kind of a long robe, one of the ways that you get ready for a particular energetic activity is you would reach between your legs, you would pull up the rear of the robe through the middle of your legs, you would tuck it into your belt, and you would tighten the belt around your loins so you're ready to go. And here they are, these people, ready to go. This is how they would eat it. They ate it standing. They ate it with their loins girded, ready to go. They ate it with the shoes on their feet and the staff in their hand, and this was not a leisurely meal. They ate it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. It's a vivid picture. It's a mindset of a people who were believing God. Outside, they could hear the wailing of the Egyptians in their mourning. Inside, they ate with anticipation. Their loins girded, the shoes on their feet, their staff in their hand, their kneading troughs on their back, it says elsewhere. They were all packed and ready to go. This is how we have to enjoin Him in His covenant, how we need to yield to Him with a readiness, with a preparedness in our hearts, so that we're ready at the moment of His choosing to go. You see, it wouldn't have been any use, would it, if Pharaoh had said, okay, now go, and they said, oh, well, we need a few days to do some packing, and we need to do this, No, they had to be ready. They had to be ready for the moment, go, that would be spoken. And that needs to be our mindset too. As we come to the place where we enter into fellowship and covenant with God Himself, we have to come to that place of readiness, ready to move at a single word, go. Let's have a look at the Bible's summary. This is Exodus 12, verse 37. And the children of Israel journeyed from Ramses, which is one of the slave cities where they'd been working, to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot that were men, besides children. And then in chapter 12 and verse 40, it adds this little summary of this event. Now the time that the children of Israel dwelt in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the self-same day it came to pass, that all the hosts of Jehovah went out from the land of Egypt. It is a night to be much observed unto Jehovah for bringing them out from the land of Egypt. This is that night of Jehovah, to be much observed of all the children of Israel throughout their generations. So we're on the way now. We're out of Egypt. The first verse of Exodus chapter 6 and verses 6 to 8, the first of those verses, which has to do with the exit, the exodus from Egypt, is now in hand. They're on their way. But it isn't just their mindset that is necessary here, it's our mindset too. Campbell Morgan, the greatest of the expositing preachers as far as I am concerned, said that the Lord's table, that's when we break bread, he said it was three things. It was a commemoration. It was a looking backwards to an event, a time when we had experienced deliverance, when the Lamb had been slain in order that redemption might be accomplished, and the people set free to follow God's will and purpose for them. It is a commemoration. You know that in 1 Corinthians, it refers to what we sometimes call the breaking of bread as the Lord's table or the Lord's Supper. Both of them are loved terms. We don't use the terms very often, I think, most of us. I like the Lord's table. I like that phrase because it reminds us that it isn't the elders who are the hosts. It's the Lord who is the host. When we break bread together, we sit, as it were, in commemoration of the time when the disciples lay on their side at the meal and shared this first covenant, new covenant, Passover. So it's a commemoration. It's a communion. Yes, it's fellowship. It's he and us together during the fellowship. And it is a covenant. It is the beginning of an establishing of a covenant. Often, and you find this recorded in the scriptures, you'll find that covenants were sealed, not just with the slaughter of the animals, but with, if you like, a festive meal, when people sat down together and celebrated what had happened. Maybe you could put another C in there. Commemoration, a communion, a reminder of covenant. Each time we break bread, brothers and sisters, it's an opportunity for us to renew the covenant, for us to remind ourselves of how we got here. I do that often. There are times when I'm worshipping the Lord, either with the saints or on my own, and suddenly an amazing kind of an awareness comes upon my spirit, and I say, Lord, how did this happen? How did I get here? I have no background in Christian things. My parents weren't believers. They were good people. I'd never been to church. In my early youth, I had no background at all. And I say, Lord, how did this happen? How did all this happen that I should be here, lifting my heart and my praise with all those who praise continually that we read of in the book of Revelation? How did this happen? This is how it happened. I remind myself each time we break bread. If I may I suggest to you that you suggest to your elders that you don't just tuck the breaking of bread into a Sunday morning or a Sunday evening meeting, but that you spend time. Spend a little time for a commemoration, for a communion, real fellowship with the Lord, for a renewing of the covenant. And yes, if we add another C to it, celebration. I'll read from Luke chapter 22 and verse 17 to verse 20. Then he took the cup and gave thanks and said, Take this and divide it among yourselves, for I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread, and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Likewise, he also took the cup after supper, saying, This cup is the new covenant in my blood. That could equally be translated by my blood. This cup is the new covenant in or by my blood, which is shed for you. And this, incidentally, is the only time that we have a record of Jesus mentioning the new covenant in the whole of his teaching. And here in this room, we have the last Old Covenant Passover and the first New Covenant Passover. As with that of Moses, it looks forward to an as yet uncompleted deliverance, but all subsequent Passovers look backwards to this one. And when Paul was writing to the Corinthians, he wrote this, Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you are truly unleavened. For indeed Christ, our Passover, there he is, was sacrificed for us. Truly you are a new lump. Has anyone told you you're a new lump? You're a new start. You're not a chip off the old block. You're a new lump. Therefore purge out the old leaven. All this was done symbolically in the old covenant, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. You see, these are pictures, of course, of the inward powers of sin. For indeed Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for us. Do spend time, brothers and sisters, to look at this passage. It's Exodus chapter 12. And use your imagination. Think what it was like for this people of Egypt in their homes as they heard the sounds from outside and inside at this Passover meal, ready to go at a moment's notice. And if you do use the version of this Bible study that comes on to thebiblebase.com, you'll find that there are opportunities for further study. You can look at the Passover and look at some of the definitions and see the implications. And you can have a little look to Edersheim, who sometimes these days comes in for a bit of criticism, but whose book, The Temple, Its Ministry and Services, is full of fascinating information. And you'll find a couple of charts and maps. So, all that remains for me now is to thank you again for your company and your fellowship in these Bible studies, and to say, God willing, we look forward to seeing you at the same place, at the same time next week. God bless you.